Hey everyone, welcome back to another resin review. We are welcoming back BlueCast to the channel as a material that potentially upends what we generally understand about casting resins. Shannon, if you could pass me that bottle, that would be great. Thank you very much. So in this bottle, which feels really weird right now, hang on one second, let's take a look at this. Oh. So I'm actually just kidding around. I did know that this was going to happen. X-Wax has such a high wax content that we're actually looking at something that's more like a true wax. This only really happens when it's stored at really low temperatures though, which is exactly how it arrived to me when it was really cold outside in about April. You do have to preheat this resin in order to print with it. So correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I think that what some people imagine when they read the marketing for some of these resin companies that say something like, this resin contains 50% or 75% or 99%, whatever, wax content. They imagine like the chemist taking a big block of injection wax or carving wax or beeswax or something and melting it down with a big torch into a big pot of chemicals, and voila, we have this magical 3D printing castable resin. Obviously that's a bit dramatic, but I kind of don't think it's too far off, honestly, what people imagine when they say wax. This is, of course, not what's happening. The term wax can apply to a very wide range of chemicals that have what would be described as wax-like properties, mainly melting, bending, smoothing, blending, things like that. But I'll admit that, with a consistency like this resin, it doesn't really help move my imagination away from that mad scientist's mental image that I've kind of just brought up. This resin would basically pass the Dairy Queen Blizzard test for thickness. It is so chunky. X-Wax is BlueCast's newest material, and it is very different than what I think most people have seen before. It does need to be heated thoroughly to melt it, but in my experience, it doesn't require an actively heated printing vat within reason. The room temperature should be over 20 Celsius for best results, which is how I printed on this Frozen Sonic Mini 8KS. Which is pretty bare bones setup, honestly, by comparison to many of the other lower cost machines on the market today, which are just getting more and more feature packed. And it's an absolutely stupid machine compared to something like the Hagear's Reflex, which we looked at recently. You should definitely check out that video. After leaving it in the vat for a day or so, it did congeal, and scraping it off into the funnel with the filter is kind of a recipe for a disaster. I ended up putting a very full funnel into my heated post-curing machine up to 50 Celsius for about 10 minutes until it liquefied enough that it could actually drop through the funnel into the bottle. Crisis averted, just be aware that this is something you may have to deal with. So don't leave it alone unless you have an actively heated vat, or at least have an actively heated print chamber to keep it warm and in that fluid state. BlueCast provided a place to start from at around 7 seconds per layer with some very minor wait times, but nothing too extreme compared to what you might imagine for a very thick resin. When this is heated up properly, it does actually become more fluid, and it does print like pretty much any normal castable resin. The bed adhesion was reliable, but not so good that it feels welded to the bed like cyan sometimes does. I did opt on these final prints to have a very wide base so that we have lots of attachment to the bed, but we'll come back to these in a second. This resin does feel quite a lot like X1 in that the prints are soft and I wouldn't say wax-like, it's almost foam-like, which means that you will need to have quite a few supports on your piece. You can't get away with that single 1mm support. If you're not familiar with our normal testing process for printing, what we do is we take the same model and we add more supports as we go along. So I start with a single 1mm support on the lowest point, and then I gradually increase it up to a hypothetical way over supported looking model. Like there's no way it couldn't print because it's a complete jungle of supports. And this in turn tells me how strong the resin is somewhere along this line. Do I have to have, can it get away with a single? We actually have had some resins get away with one single support, which is very impressive. The prints are very rarely good, but that it can do it at all is awesome. So we're trying to find somewhere in the middle. How many supports do we need? Do we have to, if we were to ship this model, pack it in foam and many layers of protection just to get it to its destination? Or is it really durable and you could just kind of throw it in a mailer and you're good? We want somewhere in between and to figure that out. In this test, we did have the single support model fail. Some of the second level up succeeded on the models that had very little surface area, such as the thin engagement ring, with gradually more failure as the models got bigger, which is not a huge surprise. The largest signet ring was quite poor on our tests and required quite a bit more supports as it got stuck just as that shank transitioned into the bottom of this really big flat top, which is about the size of a nickel. If you have your ring printed flat like this, parallel with the build plate, then what happens is you get a lot of suction that occurs, and if the resin isn't strong enough, it breaks off, and this is indeed what happened. I've determined through this testing that if you have been using X1 previously and you're now moving to X Wax, you should be able to use similar support settings, maybe just a tidge bigger or just a couple more here or there, but by and large, they are pretty much printing identically. When it's printing, I do hear it stick to the NFEP, which when I checked before I started this printing was clean with no visible scratches or anything. Definitely do follow BlueCast's advice when it comes to FEP type and thickness when it comes to this resin. Currently, they are recommending PFA instead of the generic FEP, and specifically at 0.127, I believe, millimeter thickness rather than 0.15. That little bit thinner FEP just allows for a nicer release. The thicker it is, the more durable the FEP will be, but the thinner it is, the less adhesion you have, the less force is being applied to your print, meaning you get a better print. Post-processing is very similar to X1, so you'll be very happy to hear that if you are an X1 user, in that it has the same awesome color changing effect that BlueCast has become known for very recently. But it's even more pronounced with X Wax. X1 would go from kind of like a dirty forest green raw print, and after soaking in ethyl alcohol, it becomes like a bone gray. X Wax goes from a very dark, kind of dirty royal purple to a bleached white after it's been soaking in isopropyl alcohol. So definitely make note of that. You may have to switch up which type of alcohol you're using. By and large, I believe within the resin community, isopropyl and ethyl are more or less one-to-one exchangeable. They do the same type of job. It just depends on where you're getting it from. You can get them from like farm co-ops sometimes. They'll buy them in like gallons to sterilize equipment. That would be for isopropyl alcohol, whereas ethyl alcohol can be used more as like a biofuel. I personally buy it from my local hardware store where they sell it as stove fuel. Different resins, different polymers do react differently to these different alcohols. Some of them prefer it. Power resin, for example, prefers ethyl. Now we're moving over to isopropyl with this X Wax. So just again, make note and follow the directions whenever possible. So anyway, getting back to the X Wax, what we're gonna do for post-processing with this material is we'll do a 5-minute dirty wash in isopropyl alcohol, then a 5-minute clean wash in, again, isopropyl alcohol. I used a warm air dryer, specifically the Hagear's curing machine at 30 Celsius for 10 minutes. There is no post-UV curing needed, very similar to X1. However, I know with X1, a lot of people started doing post-curing, and if you're getting good results with that, definitely do some testing. But according to the instructions, no post-UV curing needed. One note that I will make though, following the instructions, do watch your prints. Something that I noticed here, you can see this one broke off like that. I don't know why this happened, but when I talked with Stefano about this, we came to the conclusion that it could have been related to how long it soaked for. So if you end up seeing cracks and breakage, soak for less time. This sort of reminds me of Burnaway when we looked at the monocure resin. That one had a bit of an issue with overly aggressive alcohols causing cracking, usually along the layer lines. So what you should do for that one is use a washing fluid like monocure, Resin Away or something similar to wash it first and then do a quick rinse in clean alcohol to clean off the cleaner, because the cleaner isn't alcohol and it doesn't evaporate quite as nicely. So yeah, it's a whole thing. You'll also notice that this print here is still a little bit of a dark color relative to the rest. I can't quite say exactly why that happens because I did soak it. And you can see on this one, the side, I think it has something to do with the thickness of the resin. The thicker it is, the longer it needs to soak for. If you see the dark patches, you can go back and re-soak just this one model, break that off, toss it in for another 2 or so minutes, then redry it, and hopefully that will go away. If it hasn't gone away, rinse and repeat until it is all that nice bone white color. So now moving on to the casting. The model's attached to wax incredibly easily with a nice strong hold, so you don't need to use sticky wax or anything finicky like that. The surfaces stay dry and free of that oily photopolymer, photo initiator rather, leaching that some resins have. This has never really been a problem with BlueCast resins, but it is worth noting that I did not observe it. I sprued the same way as I always do, using generally accepted good spruing practices, with the heavier models towards the bottom and the lighter ones towards the top. So if your spruing could use some work, we are currently in the editing stages of an online spruing class, taking you step by step through my methods and the general industry's best practices. Shannon will be posting a pinned comment down below this video when that becomes available, or you can always check out our class tab on our website if that is of any interest to you. So within our studio, we've switched entirely to using Optima Prestige for a few reasons. Most prominently, that's what my supplier can get me for a good price. Being here in the Maritimes, we don't have a whole lot of option anymore. We also mix our investment to a 36:100 ratio now. We're using distilled water, and this is just the standard across all resins, waxes, regardless, this is what we're doing. A lot like how we approach the support testing, where we gradually start with less and then we add more as we need, we're doing the same thing with our burnout. So we start our testing with a rapid burn. And then if we see issues, we increase that time and we see how it goes. But of course, there will always be caveats with bigger prints. Rapid burnout is not always advised if you're printing something like a miniature or a small sculpture or whatever. The more you fill a flask, the heavier the model is. Generally, the longer, the more time it needs in that burnout. Now, but before we move on to the casting results, I just want to do a fun little test here because Stefano over at BlueCast gave me an indication of what to expect of what this high wax content should burn out like. Before we start this test though, I want to stress, this is not a substitute for burnout. You should never just apply a torch or a heat gun to a resin and say, oh, it's got ash or whatever, because the atmosphere around the prints is not the same as what it is in the kiln. This is just for fun. What I want to see is if this resin is going to actually melt like a wax, like physically go from a solid to a liquid and then ultimately burn into a gas. Most resins go from a solid straight to a gas. So we've chosen a few models for this little burn test, melt test. So what I've got set up here is the ventilation right over top of my Kea. This sucks up, my fumes when I'm casting normally. I've got a tile. I'm going to put this fire brick right there. We're going to start with a heat gun. I'm going to put it on high, 1350 watts, 800 to 1100 Fahrenheit. So that is not small. We're looking for 150 Celsius. Yeah, maybe we'll actually start on low. And one last thing is I have this very high temp laser heat gun just on this tripod. I'm just gonna put like a zip tie around this so it's on, and we're gonna aim it at the piece that we're going to be melting, and we'll see what kind of temperatures we get to. Obviously with the heat gun, this is gonna be much easier. When I hit it with a torch, well, the flame will probably throw off all the readings. So we'll see what happens. So this came straight from Stefano. The chemical process is very complex because 20% of the resin retains its physical shape at temperatures above 150 Celsius. But what happens around these temperatures is quite interesting. If you heat the models with a heat gun, you'll start to see some of the light oozing and smoke. That's the wax sublimating. So the model will appear unchanged, but it will be 50 to 60% lighter and extremely flexible. Fire. So I got a little impatient. The heat gun worked. It definitely gets it up to about 250 Celsius, which is more than what we were stated in the email. But what wasn't stipulated was the amount of time. I did see some smoke. I did see some residue starting to burn off and start to char and look kind of like a marshmallow. I think I was looking for a more wax-like reaction where it literally starts to like slump and melt and fall into itself. That didn't really happen with the heat gun. With the torch, it only took a couple of seconds. With the laser temp gun, it was showing at about 500 C active combustion, which is incredibly low. 500 C is less than 1,000 Fahrenheit. We have up here on our cheat sheet over here just some useful things that I've found to be, good in this situation. You want to know a good conversion. With a little bit more heat, and a little bit more time, maybe less forced air, blowing on it, moving that smoke away, we would see more of a reaction. But we're very close to what I kind of pictured. So these results are neat, but again, I have to reiterate, this is not an accurate representation of a burnout process. We are simply looking at verifying the ignition and the melt point and visually confirming that the wax-like quality is as they are saying. So now let's actually look at those casting results. As per usual, we cast in silicon bronze. And I just want to preface here before we start that these ones were actually the ones that I would say are the prettiest and the nicest prints. These ones were taken off of some of the other beds that worked out, but this is more like the ideal amount of supports. Like for instance, this one here is on its side. This one was printed fully upright, and you can see layer lines as such and a little bit of collapsing underneath. So you should be turning your rings to about a 30 to 45 degree angle if you're doing a flat top signet. So anyway, the point is that all of these prints, what we put into the flask is what we got out of the flask, which is ideal. Now let's look at everything in order of size. So this one was the engagement ring. This one does have a stress fracture from when we cut this off and the tumbling and stuff like that, and there's a bubble. Those are all casting issues. They aren't actually problems with the resin itself. That's all separate. But we don't see any rough texture on the sides of the shank. Everything came out nice and clear. We'll move on to the other engagement ring with more stone settings. I usually see on some castings some surface texture here, but all I'm seeing is some support marks. No big deal. All of the stone settings came out great. You can see through each of these, they all held up really well. All the prongs filled out with nice sharp corners on top, nothing rounded over. The pave setting one has some gunk in there, but that's actually just like grit or something. I'm not sure what that is, honestly. But all of them came out. You can see right through each one. Each hole is approximately 0.5 millimeter in diameter, and those all came out. So there was almost no sign of, well, actually zero sign of resin expansion, which tends to break off things like that. Got no issues on the shank, which came out nice and clean and shiny. Then we move on to the bigger stuff. This is the smaller of the signets. Really nice and shiny, no issues except for some support marks. The inside is nice and crisp. This one is actually not a great print because inside you can see there's actually like some flaking and some collapsing. That means that it didn't have enough supports, similar to this one. But what we got out is exactly what we put in. So it doesn't look that great as a print, but it looks exactly the way it should have since we cast it anyway. Got the big one, very similar. None of this collapsed, which is definitely a point of interest on something of this size. Same with the inside there. That one should have had more support. And then the skull, of course, beautiful details. Nothing collapsed, everything's there. So in summary, for BlueCast's X Wax, I am not surprised at all by the good performance. I would expect nothing less from BlueCast. If this resin hadn't done well in the casting, I would have been really surprised. The part that I'm most surprised by is the printing. I was expecting that a resin like this that solidifies at a certain temperature to require that I jump through tons more hoops, so to speak. I would have to have a printer that has a heated chamber or a heated vat or something extra that isn't impossible to achieve now with most modern machines, even on the lower end price-wise. But I didn't print with those, and I was expecting to have much more issues. So if you live in a warm climate, awesome. You don't probably need to do anything. If you live in a cold climate, yes, definitely consider getting something heated. Maybe like a thermal tent, putting a heater in there, just upgrading your machine so that you have that onboard heater inside the print chamber or whatever you have to do. Just try to maintain that 20 Celsius. The one big concession for this resin is that you do have to have a fairly dense support structure going on because the resin itself is not very tough. So in terms of rating for this material, to go on to our ranked resin sheet, I'm going to give this a 10 out of 10 for casting because it's flawless in every way using a rapid burnout. I bet you could even get away with less if you had a smaller flask size, a much smaller model, just like a single ring in a small flask. 2 hours maybe. Don't quote me yet, haven't tried it. And I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10 for printing solely because of that heat requirement. Again, if you're in a cooler climate, this could pose a lot of problems. I am in one of those climates, so I am struggling a little bit. Now, last thing that we should mention is the cost. BlueCast resins have always commanded a premium price point, and I don't believe this one's going to be any different. BlueCast X1 usually comes in around 180 Canadian dollars for 500 milliliters. So we're talking about $320-ish per liter, which is on the higher end. Hopefully with this whole trade farce that's going on, it doesn't affect you wherever you may be. Now that all said, I'm not entirely sure what X-Wax is going to sell for. I've had this resin pre-launch for about a month or so. I will have the price down below in the description as this video will be going up on or just after the launch date. So I hope that you found this video informative in making a decision about which resin might be best for you. I'll have a link down below in the description if you need more information about X-Wax on the BlueCast website. And also through their website, you should be able to find the location of the nearest supplier to you. If you find yourself needing help with this or any other resin, give our YouTube membership program a try, as you'll get access to our Discord, which may offer a one-to-one call depending on the tier level that you're at. Longer format director's cut videos as well, and tutorial videos that we'll be posting, and early sign-up access to our in-person workshops, and much more to come. Even if you don't need one-on-one help, do consider that cup of coffee tier, as review videos such as this one are generally considered unsponsorable content and are directly supported by membership fees and directly support our channel and bringing more of that to you guys. So that's all for this video. I will see you guys in the next one.